Now, opinion polls, according to the latest Fairfax-Ipsos poll, the government's recovery appears to have stalled.
Well, it does appear to have stalled a bit. We did see that sort of recovery, as you referred to it, after Tony Abbott survived that near-death experience at the start of February, when there was an attempt at a spill motion. Voters appeared after that to focus a little bit, maybe took the same attitude that many of Tony Abbott's colleagues in the party room had taken, which is the Prime Minister needs a little bit more time, and so we saw a bit of a recovery that now seems to have evaporated.
Indeed, I think it was probably the Fairfax-Ipsos poll that came out during that last week on the Monday that showed the government recovering that really took the heat out. But now it's pretty much back to the same place, the poll back to the similar place it was a couple of months ago.
Well, that's true, and we have seen a bit of volatility in the major opinion polls between Fairfax-Ipsos on the one hand and Newspoll on the other. There's been a little bit of volatility around, more so than normal, and that's, I think, shaken some people's confidence in the story that's being told. I don't really have an explanation for it beyond saying that these surveys are conducted according to the appropriate polling conventions, and we're seeing things swing around a little bit. I think that reflects perhaps a genuine volatility in the electorate.
Yeah, I mean, one explanation would be that people may like this, dislike that, but they're not really, their views haven't solidified. That's when it comes to the political parties themselves. But what are the polls telling us about people's opinions about individual politicians?
Well, that is quite interesting. I mean, what we've seen and known for a long time is that Tony Abbott is an unpopular Prime Minister. I mean, he was unpopular when he was elected and broke records for doing that. But he's been in very, very negative territory for a long time now. I think he's been as high as negative 38 at one stage. That is his approval rating minus his disapproval rating, and it's put him strongly into negative territory. Bill Shorten, on the other hand, has mostly been in sort of positive territory, only narrowly, but nonetheless. Now, this poll shows Shorten's now just dipped below the line. I think he's at -2, but Tony Abbott's at -26. The interesting thing is, though, that Joe Hockey is at -25.
Yes, now, Tony Abbott has never been a particularly popular politician. Bill Shorten, I think, probably not that polarising. People haven't maybe had such strong opinions. Yet Joe Hockey was once possibly the most popular politician federally, and was seen as a great retail politician, but his stocks have really plummeted, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Joe Hockey, of course, was a leadership contender back in 2009 when he was pipped by Tony Abbott. At that stage, people genuinely thought he was the next great hope of conservative politics and of the Liberal Party. Even in the life of this government after the 2013 election, when the government was already beginning to drift, it certainly appeared that way in the first 6 months, Joe Hockey appeared to be the sort of the spine, the policy spine of the government, seemed to be the one who had performed well in Parliament and was doing well. And these things were reflected in strong approval ratings for the Treasurer over and above a lot of other personalities in the government. At that stage, about 13 months ago, he was +20 in his approval rating. So that's a pretty strong place for a Treasurer to be. Now, the pre-budget period last year, the Audit Commission, all of the nasties that were associated with that, and then the budget itself and what we know has gone on since, has taken a terrible toll on Joe Hockey's standing. In fact, it constitutes a now 45% reversal from +20 back then to -25 now. So I guess you could probably say that some of Tony Abbott's problem, perhaps a very significant portion of Tony Abbott's problem, is the profound unpopularity of his Treasurer.
And the problem for Joe Hockey is that he finds himself in an economic situation, a budgetary situation, where the economy, the global economy, is doing him no favours, particularly with the collapse of the iron ore price. I mean, I would really hate to be the Treasurer at the moment trying to frame a budget.
I think it's very difficult. And mind you, Wayne Swan had very similar situations occur where he had massive revenue write-downs that he had to announce on a number of occasions, was given absolutely no scope, no leeway by the then opposition to do so, which just criticised him for having had dodgy forecasts and for having been too optimistic and for spending too much money. We now find this government in a very similar situation, and there's no doubt about it. The point you make is absolutely right. The parameters have changed. The iron ore price has gone from $130 a tonne about 13, 14 months ago to now around the mid-40s. And what we now see is that Treasury is having to cast down its projections of where iron ore prices might go, and is going to be budgeting on a $35 a tonne price, so almost $100 from what it was not so long ago. And each time that happens, it is taking literally billions, up to $25 billion out of the budget, if that's the scope of the reduction.
So the political fate of Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey, how much are they interconnected, those two? And how much is their future standing depend on this budget?
Politically, these two are Siamese twins. There's no question about it. I mean, Tony Abbott really has not had. There has been some pressure on Abbott to move Joe Hockey, to get someone else into that portfolio, given how badly the economic narrative of the government has been. The hope was that perhaps the argument was that perhaps if you could put someone else in there, you could actually change the economic story. You could unburden yourself from some of the previous decisions. Now, Abbott's been doing that anyway, but it doesn't appear that voters have been buying this story, at least not according to the poll we have today. So he no longer really has a chance to get rid of Hockey because the two are seen as I say, two peas in the same pod. And the economic story of the government is the economic story between the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. These are the key, the two most important portfolios in the government. So I think they either sort of claw their way out of this together with this coming budget and with a sort of a slowly but surely ascent out of this trouble, or, as many people in the Liberal Party room now fear, they don't.
Now, it is a difficult political situation, a difficult economic situation for the government. On the other hand, one glimmer of hope is the public, according to these opinion polls, seems to be more receptive about tax reform, GST, superannuation, issues like that. So that gives them a glimmer of maybe some room to move, or am I overreading that?
I don't think you're overreading it, although I don't know what sort of room it gives them to manoeuvre, given the sort of emphatic statements that they've made in the past. I mean, the government is, for example, locked into no negative changes to superannuation rules this term. And yet we see in this poll that I think something like 43% of people take the view that superannuation concessions, now we know this is favourable tax treatment of contributions and withdrawals from superannuation, that superannuation concessions taken together now constitute as much of a drain on the federal budget as do the age pension, and superannuation is meant to take pressure off the age pension. It's an enormous drain. Now, Australians are saying, 43% of them are saying, it's time to look at this. It may be time to address these generous tax concessions for superannuation, particularly for middle and high income earners, because that might be a way of getting some sort of budget repair happening and re-establishing fairness. That wasn't why the policy was set up in the first place. And it's a fairly high number of people who are suggesting that even middle income earners might pay a bit more in the way of tax on their contributions. Similarly with the GST, we see that 37% of people are now advocating or would support increasing the rate of the GST. It's currently at 10%, as you know. Now, this is an amazing figure, really. One, it's over a third of voters.
A few years ago, it was just 12% or something.
Yeah, that's right. And a year ago, it was 30%. It's now 7% higher than that. And this is without either major party advocating any change to the GST. I mean, neither side's got the guts to actually do anything about this. The closest the government's gone to it is to say that any change would only ever come from being driven by the state premiers. Of course, the GST is a tax that is given in whole to the states in terms of the revenue apportioned out. But so the Prime Minister's gone as far as to say, well, if the premiers want the rate increase, they'll have to come to us and talk about it. But neither side's got the political sand to do it. So, what we see is people themselves actually, I think, maybe this is one of the byproducts of the last year of all of this talk about tax and revenue and so forth, people actually saying, well, maybe we do need to look at the revenue side of the budget.
Okay, you've described what the opportunities and pitfalls are for Tony Abbott and Joe Hockey. What about for Labor? How should Labor be reading this current situation, the mood in the public? How should it be positioning itself coming into and out of the budget?
Well, I mean, I suppose Labor would say at this stage that it's doing what it's done quite well. It's been ahead in the polls for almost the entire term of Abbott being Prime Minister. It happened quite quickly. And Bill Shorten remains preferred Prime Minister. I think it's 46 to 38 is the rating in the poll at the moment. So they want to keep on doing what they're doing, but they can't keep doing that forever. I mean, we're now more than halfway through this term. Bill Shorten, the pressure is starting to mount on Shorten to come up with some policy heft, some substance, rather than just saying no or just criticising the government. So perhaps the Labor Party now needs to look at, well, what are we going to have to work with? How do we position ourselves? We need the government to take, well, any government now needs to take some tough decisions on the revenue side as well as the spending side, and perhaps Labor needs to start thinking about that in terms of what it will be like should it win the next election. Why not get this government to do some of those unpopular things, some of those tough things? In other words, why not support some of those things in the Senate, albeit whilst taking pot shots, which is the political way, and get this government to actually wear some of the opprobrium, I suppose, from those tough policies. But that might do a bit of budget repair, and a bit of budget repair is good for both sides of politics. It's good for the opposition too, because money that's not in the budget can't be promised by an opposition at the next election, at least not credibly anyway.
Okay, Mark Kenny, thanks for your insights today.
Thanks, Chris.